Hello, this is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. Today I'm going to be reviewing CDFM Module 3, Competency 2, Finance, out of the 2020 study guide. So let's begin on page 3.2.5. And we're talking about the major functions of finance. So finance have four major functions. They are entitlements. That's when you're trying to determine if the individual is entitled to a particular pay. The second is payments. That's when you make disbursements. So once you see, yes, they are entitled, then you give them the payment. Collections, if they owe the government funding. And control of public funds using our automated system. All right, page 326 just goes into the DoD FMR volume. DoD FMR 7000.14R. It gives you the various topics that you cover: military pay, travel pay, admin, contracts. All of it is covered in 7000.14R. All right, so we got a lot of laws and regulations on page 7. So you can read through that. I'm going to move on to page 8, which is the entitlement process. So that's the first function. And on the first function, entitling is where you're legally establishing that individual's right to any benefits. So if the individual comes in and they say, okay, well, I'm entitled to basic allowance for housing. Well, the requirement for that is you need a marriage certificate to show that you are entitled to it. So with that, once they show their marriage certificate and any other documentation to prove that they're entitled to it, then you go through entitling, authorization, you prepare the voucher, that's all the documents, and then you have a certify that the payment is correct. So entitling. When you certify funds, you got to remember, certification equals now you're accountable, you're an accountable official, and that means you can be held liable for any erroneous payment. So you got to be real careful, make sure you review. There's very little tolerance for us making mistakes when it comes to disbursement of funds, so you got to be careful. On page 3 to 11, it gives you a list of the accountable individuals: departmental accountability officials, certifying officers, and your disbursing officers. And it lists each one and the roles that they play. And then on page 12, it's saying that if you're not sure about a payment, you can get an advanced decision. Whether it's going, if you're a disbursing officer, might go all the way up to the Treasury Department to get clarification on making a certain type of payment before you actually do it. Because there are rules associated with improper payment. Some examples listed on page 13. Make sure you read through. So even though I'm skipping pages, when you study your first round, you need to go through all the information. I just want to point out some important things as we go through. All right, on page 3 to 14, it goes into certifying military pay entitlement. So military pay is separate from civilian pay. Military personnel are paid on a 30-day basis, and you may find that in DoD FMR Volume 7 Alpha. And if you have to go to the law, under Title 10 of the law, typically deals with your military personnel, Title 10, and then your National Guard is covered in Title 32. On page 3 to 15, it talks about the leave. Military, each year, they get 30 days leave, and if they're getting out and they want to sell back, they can sell back up to 60 days of leave. The third bullet talks about clothing allowance. So enlisted personnel get a clothing allowance every year, an anniversary of when they came into the military. But officers get a one-time clothing allowance when they first become an officer, and it's not more than $400 that they get. So I wanted to point that out on page 15. All right, allotments on page 16. Military personnel can have up to 6 discretionary allotments. So discretionary allotments are allotments that the individuals select for themselves. Let's say car payments. I want to pay my mortgage. I can do an allotment to pay those things. Discretionary. Non-discretionary allotments are things you really don't control, such as child support, such as like when you do TRICARE and they take money out, or dental and they take money out. You don't really set the amount, they do that. So those are considered non-discretionary allotment. And there's no limit, if I remember correctly, unlimited number of non-discretionary allotment. Page 17 begins your civilian pay. Military is paid on 30-day months, regardless if the month is 28 days or if it's 31 days, you get paid in a 30-day month. Civilians get paid on a 26 pay period per year. So per 52 weeks, 26 pay period. And then we have different types of payment. Premium payment, which is like if you work overtime, they give you a list. And on page 18, they give you certain entitlements associated with leave. Like you can have leave without pay is one of the examples. Determining, and then there's limitations on that leave without pay. Family Medical Leave Act. If you have someone that's ill and you have to stay home to take care of them as a civilian, you can cite the Family and Medical Leave Act, where you get 12 work weeks of unpaid leave per year. On page 3-19, it goes into internal controls of civilian pay, establishment and control of pay records. What I want to note here of the pay records, civilian pay records are maintained for 56 years. Don't ask me why so long, but based on this, that's what it says. Pay records for civilians are kept for 56 years. And I don't think, let's go back. Maybe I missed it. Did it say anything for the military pay records? I didn't see anything. All right, so we'll drive on. All right. Travel. I have a few questions that always comes up with permanent change of station. So PCS. So on page 3-22, who pays? All costs associated with a civilian permanent duty travel move are normally charged to the gaining unit. So typically, it's charged to the gaining unit. Exceptions. There are 2 exceptions. Between agencies, if you're going from one agency to the next, or within the same DoD component. One Army organization to another Army organization based on reduction in force, they close an installation. If you go from Oconus to Conus, from Oconus to Hawaii, that means the losing organization pays. But typically the gaining activity pays. So I wanted to point that out. Payment to vendors, your payment package. Of course, you got the contract, invoice receipt. I received the items, and then acceptance. I accept it. So you have an acceptance document. Page 24, payments to vendors. There's special conditions: fast pay, pay and confirm, constructive acceptance. And it's listed, they're explained there. The first one, fast pay, refers to the situation where the contractor authorized to certify the goods have been delivered. So depending on what rules were established in that contract, you will either use one of those methods. Prompt Payment Act, you have to be familiar with the act because you'll also have to do page 26, 27 is the prompt payment, meaning when you get your bills, they need to be paid within that first 30 days. So let's go to page 26, 27. Make sure you review this section because you may have to calculate the net payment due date from when you receive the items. And so they give you the constructive acceptance dates and when you calculate the payment due date. So review that section. Disbursing Authority, that's a lot of information. Remember DFAS, because you're at a DOD level. DSSN is mentioned at the top of page 29. Disbursing, let me get it right. Disbursing station symbol numbers and identification numbers specific to that payment office when it relates to the Treasury Department. All right, so the ways in which government funds are dispersed could be electronic funds transfer, EFT, Treasury check, large disbursements, and disbursing payment systems, miscellaneous pay, which I'm quite familiar with. That's where you use the MIGO, the MIRO, and so forth for your miscellaneous payments. E-commerce on page 32, got a list of information. So in this section, the finance section is mostly processes, the four functions, what happens, how you process the EFT, how you process the payment, and then at the very end, then you have the various reports. That's where you need to understand the various report. On page 3234 is the cash collection voucher that we typically use, the DD form 1131. If, let's say, a soldier loses a gear and they have to then pay back the government for that gear, then you'll use a CCV, cash collection voucher, to receive that payment. So read through that. Collection and reporting systems. If the government is owed, those are some systems on page 36 where the accounting system kind of link up to determine any collection that needs to be taken in for debt. So you have your debt collection. On page 37, it talks about collection of debt by individuals. If the individual is still working for the government, then they're notified, and I think they only get notified one letter, if you read through it, from DFAS, the debt management folks, and then that they're owed. And if they don't honor that, then eventually salary offset is initiated to take the money out of their paycheck. And then if they're not in the service, then a collection of a debt by a former, whether it's military or civilian, they also send a note to the last address. And then if they don't reply, then they could take other measures such as tagging your IRS, your refunds, something like that, to get the money paid back. 38 goes into collection of an amount from a contractor. They have various thresholds, $25 or more, referral of delinquent debts to DMO if it's $25 or more and they have a tax ID, or $100 or more if the contractor does not have a tax ID number. Debts must be forwarded no later than 90 days from the debt repayment due date. So you have some timelines there, and then referral to the Treasury to pull the money 120 days. So read through that section. All right, at the top of page 39, do not pay initiative. Office of Management and Budget has the responsibility for the do not pay initiative. That's where the list where they come out of certain contractors that they should not pay. That's where that list is generated, Office of Management and Budget. 39, control of public funds. We talked about certifying officers, accountable individuals. They have pecuniary liability, meaning that we can be tagged to pay back the government funding if we certify a payment and then it was done in error and we can't fix it. Page 40, let's say you're a dispersing officer, dispersing agent, and your account is out of balance. Remember, we can't be over, we cannot be under. You got to be balanced. So if you're out of balance, you have what's called a major loss and a minor loss. What makes something a major loss is if it's $750 or more, it's major. It's minor if it's less than $750. Check issue overdraft is like an overdraft in your personal credit, personal account. I issue a check knowing I don't have any money in the bank. Underdraft, I know I owe you $20, but I wrote a check for $10. Underdraft. So that's what that means in the simplest term. Page 3241 looks at the delivery of checks. So you're owed, the individual is owed these checks. If it's undeliverable, the dispersing officer will attempt to check the payee for a 60-day period. So for 2 months, they're going to be trying to pay you. And if the check is undeliverable after the 60 days from the date of issue, it has been impossible to deliver, the normal method of delivery is through the U.S. Postal Service. So if I can't do EFT, because your account's not working, I keep trying to reach you, then I can try to mail your check. Reporting of undelivered checks, they have a form, SF 1098, that must be filled out for the undeliverable checks. And payment of old checks. If you get, let's say, a check from the Treasury and it's $10, and you're like, you know what, you threw it in the drawer, it's those checks are only good, negotiable for a year. So let's say it's after a year you find this check. If you were entitled or are entitled to that money, you cannot cash that check, but you can return it to the Treasury to request a reissue of a new check. Same thing with a spoiled check. Spoiled check is a check, let's say you spill coffee. If you're deployed, you spill, or blood is on the check and you can't, it's no longer negotiable. You can't read the numbers, it's the account number. So you also have to request from that dispersing, whoever wrote you the check, you got to go back to them to reissue a new check. The Borrowing Act, that's a law on the bottom of page 3241 that requires the government to receive any claim within 6 years. That's your statute of limitation. So the statute of limitations for claims is 6 years based on the Borrowing Act. So the reports that I was talking about earlier on page 42 and the top of 43, dispersing officer requirement. You have daily reports, weekly, let me see, it's weekly or monthly. We talk about the cash collection voucher log. So make sure you know the differences. So the best thing to do is to write them down and then pull out the information that goes with each one to say what they're used for. Okay, so that concludes CDFM Module 3, Competency 2, subject is Finance, out of the 2020 study guide. So be sure to click like, click share it with someone else that is also studying to get their CDFM. And this is Helen Thomas signing off, and I'll see you guys again next time.